Hey, what's up, Internet? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am the Jer, the Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and checking out my channel. Today we are going to talk about the new film Backrooms. New film just opened, I think, last weekend, maybe 2 weekends ago. Directed by Kane Parsons. It's got a number of really great actors in it. I went in, let's see, from A24. I was pretty sure I wanted to double check. From A24, Kane Parsons had directed sort of a YouTube series, made a YouTube series about like a 4chan copy pasta about liminal spaces. And the movie just had an interesting look. I had seen the liminal space picture before. It's from like an old storefront in Oshkosh, I'm from Wisconsin. I have family who are from Fond du Lac. One side of my family is from Fond du Lac, which is just north of Oshkosh. As somebody who coached Division III volleyball, had to go through UW Oshkosh quite regularly. So a little bit of hometown trivia. It's not hometown. I'm not from there, but home state trivia. And as a therapist, I love liminal spaces. I love talking about that. That's a thing that comes up a lot. We'll get into some of the mental health in the movie and also how it comes up in therapy when we use the phrase liminal spaces. But yeah, sort of this little bit of like internet lore. There was this post, and it was sort of attached then to like a 2-sentence horror story about if you sort of pop out of reality, you end up in this these liminal spaces, these sort of abandoned office spaces that seem to go on forever, that are labyrinth, and is a really cool concept. I liked the setting of the film. That's not true. It's deeply uncomfortable. But again, stylistically, it was really cool. I liked a lot about this film. I thought it was fun. And I think film, Backrooms has been doing really well. The other film that's been doing really well, also from a YouTuber, is Obsession, that showed at Milwaukee Film Festival about a month ago before getting a regular screening run, and that's doing really well. I am afraid Hollywood will go, let's start giving more YouTubers movies, and let's start doing sequels for these things. And I don't think either of those things is the correct takeaway. I think horror is popular right now. Horror has been popular in the comic book industry for a while. To suggest that movies are a few years behind where the comic book industry is, I don't think is irresponsible of me, considering how many movies are being made by comic books. It's taking the stories from comic books, but also creative ideas. We're getting Superwoman. We're getting Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, from Tom King from a number of years ago already. James Gunn is basically doing straight DC Comics. Jason Aaron's show, Southern Bastards, is getting turned into a show. His comic book run, one of my favorite comics. I've interviewed him before. If you want to check that out on the podcast, Your Therapist Needs Therapy, one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. And yeah, so like horror in comics has been pretty hot. James Tynion, fellow Wisconsinite, we're just doing all the Wisconsin trivia today, has a number of horror books that have been doing really well. Nice House by the Sea, Nice House by the Lake. Some of his other stuff has been doing really well because in times of social upheaval, in times of angst, existential dread about society, horror starts to do really well. So again, I don't think the takeaway for Hollywood here is YouTubers make great movies or that we need to make a bunch of horror sequels. I think this is the idea of like people are desperate for novel storytelling, and Backrooms I think is closer to novelty than maybe Obsession is. But I think people want horror. Horror helps us process some of the way that we're feeling. It gives us an outlet to experience some of the dread that we're feeling when we listen to the news, when we're listening to our favorite podcasts, when we're, watching comedy shows that are about the news that are super depressing and terrible to watch. When everything is expensive and getting worse on purpose, horror gives us some sort of shape to that. Horror lets us process that, sometimes in the movie theater, sometimes in our own living room with our friends and family. So horror, I think, is going to continue to be popular. Do I think we needed 10 Saw movies? No, I think Saw was a unique story with a horror premise, and it did really well, and then Hollywood drove it into the ground. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen with Backrooms. Certainly, there's a whole lore here. We'll get into a little bit of that, where it might be set up for more movies, and that might be okay, but also I'm wary of it. So we'll get into that. I really liked the movie. I think on Letterboxd, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a lot of fun. The first hour, I mean, it's a short movie, it's an hour and 45 minutes. The first hour is deeply unsettling. From the setting, which is sort of uncanny valley, to the soundtrack, which is like very loud fluorescent lights, to a character that's sort of getting unhinged. It's really fun. It is unsettling. It's unsettling more than like any sort of jump scare or anything like that. There's a bit of the found footage stuff thrown in there for any of you sort of old heads who maybe grew up on horror with like Blair Witch and stuff like that. I think it's done really well, honestly. And the YouTube series does that well too. But yeah, it's fun, I think. And the second half of the movie is not as scary, but I think is necessary. Otherwise, it sort of would have been a movie that wasn't really about anything. So, but yeah, I liked it. Again, I don't know. A horror movie would have to do a lot to sort of revolutionize art and filmmaking. But I think it fits into what I suspect will be a trend of horror films doing pretty well, as there's a high degree of social upheaval. And it was fun. I mean, a unique story is needed. We don't need more and more remakes. We don't need shittier versions of old films that felt very lively and colorful, shot on a green screen. We want unique stories, and we want that. You know, Kane Parsons is like a young dude. He's 20, is what I saw, and which is wild because I felt like this was a really millennial coded movie. From sort of the unending rooms that reminded me very, very much of that old sort of screensaver that was like set in a maze. And maybe other people weren't fascinated with their early computers screensavers, but I messed with our screensavers constantly, just as a source of novelty and dopamine for my undiagnosed ADHD brain. So sort of like if you had that old screensaver where you're in a maze, what if it was a horror film and it was set in an abandoned warehouse? And so again, I think kudos to him for being a successful dude at his age, making art and getting a big movie production around sort of this YouTube series that he had created. So that's very cool. But yeah, I'm not shocked that 20-year-olds are creative. I'm shocked that it wasn't somebody older, because again, I think this movie spoke to some of the existential dread of never really having an economy that worked well for us, no upward mobility, and sort of this endless building of and taking up of spaces that could be used for literally anything else. So I really vibed with some of the horror, the unspoken horror of the film from that perspective. As a millennial, I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha also could be feeling those same things. Again, millennials were sort of the first generation to go through, oh shit, the economy's not going to ever work for us. I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha are getting even worse versions of that. So, but it did remind me of the screensaver. I don't know if other millennials felt that. Young people may not know what I'm talking about, but I don't know. The internet exists. I'm sure you can look it up. Screensavers, not really a thing anymore. All right. We're about 10 minutes in. End of spoiler-free review. Spoilers from here on out, because I do want to talk about some of the plot points in the film, and I also want to talk about some of the characters in the film, as those are the most relevant things to mental health, which is my jam and what I like to talk about. There's a therapist in the film. You know I'm going to talk about it, right? You know I'm going to talk about a movie that has a therapist in it. And so the movie is sort of set by our main character is Clark, and Clark is getting his furniture store up and running. it's having power surges is really like the plot that moves it forward. But Clark is also in therapy. He's seeing his therapist. Her name is Mary. He's been listening to some of Mary's like self-help recorded tapes, which is fine. The movie doesn't necessarily set a time for when it's set. I guess I can double check that quick. In 1990. Okay, so it's set in 1990. I don't know. I guess that's set up in the film. The found footage is dated, but then we sort of go into some of the past for both Mary and for Clark, and we go into the present moment. And so it's sort of a there's found footage in 1990. I get that. I didn't necessarily watch the film to say, oh, this whole film is set in 1990, but there is sort of an old sense to it, although it's sort of a failing mall at that point, and that's not necessarily what mall culture was. Some of the TV certainly places it in a certain point, but if you were to ask me, when did you go from like box screen to flat screen, I would be like, I don't know. When did people stop doing like really hokey commercials? Like, I don't know. Like, there's a nostalgia feel to it that isn't tied to a certain time frame. It doesn't need to be like, it could have been 1998 for all I know. It could have been, 2000, 2001. Like, sort of the cultural things that stand out at that point are like Columbine and September 11th. So like, yeah, it could have been anywhere in the 90s, but early 90. All right, fine. Glad I double checked. Set in 1990. And again, I think if you've watched the YouTube series, you're like tapped in right away to some of the lore. You know the found footage stuff. You know what's going on. It sets up this company that is researching the Backrooms and trying to map them as sort of this extra dimensional portal thing that they've got going, which we get to in the second half of the film. But we don't really know any of that. Again, I did not watch the YouTube series. I don't know if I said this already. I didn't watch the YouTube series going in, so I was going in pretty fresh. I did know who the director was and that he had a YouTube series and then got a movie. But I didn't know if it was a brand new story or continuity, and it does seem to be sort of at least existing in that universe, which is interesting, right? Then will we get more movies in that universe, or is this to promote the YouTube? I don't know. Do you make more money off of having a successful YouTube channel than you do having movies at this stage in our modern history? Valid question. So I think, anyway, we get Clark. Clark's got this guy trying to do his power. There's like, it's unsettling, right? Clark's divorced. He's sleeping in his store. The power keeps going out, but not in a like gotcha sort of way, not in a jump scare sort of way, in a like unsettling sort of way. Again, Clark isn't scared the power's going out. He's frustrated the power's going out. He has a electrician coming in. So he sort of then sees like this slit of light on the wall in the basement of his furniture store. And so that's when he falls through the wall and ends up in the back rooms. And it's really uncanny valley. Now, liminal space as an aesthetic is sort of that uncanny valley thing. It's something that in theory is generally going to be quite popularized. A hotel lobby, a store, some of this other stuff as an aesthetic, especially in like the sort of horror community portion of the internet that is fascinated with liminal spaces, is something should be here. And because people aren't here, what is the question? Is it abandoned? Is there nuclear fallout? Are there zombies? Is it ghosts? Like, the brain wants to sort of assume there should be something here. Why isn't there? And also it feels like there still is something there. And a lot of it's sort of that 90s, late 80s, 90s idea of like abandoned sort of stuff. Somebody who grew up near Northridge, like having an abandoned mall from the 90s is not an uncommon thing, I don't think, but maybe it is, but super common depending on where you're at. And if you're close to an abandoned mall, I guess. If you're from Milwaukee, Northridge, and that liminal space is really interesting to me because I think that's very much internet culture and specifically horror, because when I heard there's going to be a horror film about liminal spaces, like, sign me up, because I talk about liminal spaces in therapy all of the time. Liminal spaces as the space in between things. Some therapists talk about liminal space as the point in between the space in between transitions, sort of a resting point, take your bearings, catch your breath kind of thing. I talk about liminal spaces very sort of technically. Technical is maybe the wrong word. I talk about it as sort of a proactive space where when I'm talking about stress relief with people, when I'm talking about grounding with people, most clients look at me like I'm crazy. Like, where am I going to get the time for more stress relief? I already don't have time to do the things that I want to do. And now you're asking me to stress relief. And so I talk about liminal spaces as sort of these dead spaces in your calendar, in your daily agenda that we can take advantage of. I don't need people to go to the spa for an hour. I need people to find these 5 minutes here, 3 minutes there, 15 minutes there, possibly of space in between things, in between meetings, in between Zoom calls, in between dropping your kid off and where you have to be next, time in the car, your lunch break, time before you have to go pick your kids up. Sort of these unused spaces. As an ADHDer, I find them to be very unhelpful, because if I have something in my schedule hanging over my head, I have to just keep thinking about that thing so I'm not late and I don't forget about it. But most people do have sort of these liminal spaces, time in between your other accounted for time that we can take advantage of. Again, even if it's like 3 minutes, we can do a breathing technique in that time. We can do body scans in that time. So as somebody who's trained in postmodern therapy, somebody who's done a lot of narrative therapy over the years, liminal spaces is a concept I've talked about a lot. Chris Hoff is another therapist who has a podcast. It's The Radical Therapist. I've met him at some point. I'll probably be on his podcast, or he'll probably be on mine, because that's how it works. But he talks about liminal spaces as well, sort of the spaces in between other things that we've got going on. And those can be really powerful. They can be, again, recharging, rejuvenating, restful, grounding. But liminal spaces on the internet are sort of this like certain aesthetic. And the Backrooms aesthetic is yellow walls. Again, like imagine a store getting renovated in small town Wisconsin, and like, yep, that's your aesthetic. A certain level of like high fluorescent lights. Again, just like the buzz of the lights was really grating. As somebody who's neurodivergent and doesn't necessarily like that, I don't find some of the ASMR stuff that's popular online to at all be soothing for my neurodivergence. I find it very grating, and the sounds were very grating. And so yeah, Clark falls in and sort of starts exploring, and then there's weird stuff, unsettling stuff. He runs one of the rooms he goes through has a camera in it, and we sort of zoom out and see Mark Duplass, who's playing a character named Phil, and Phil is watching the recording. And again, I think if you've watched the YouTube series, that means something to you. If you haven't watched the YouTube series, it's part of the unfolding mystery. Again, I think the film worked pretty well as a standalone. You didn't really need to know anything going into it. I do think it worked well to get people to then go look up the YouTube series. I did that, and most of the comments were like, who's here after the movie? Who's here after seeing the trailer? So I think that'll be a big thing that probably happens. People are like, that was cool, let's go dig into the lore. And then there's like a scary thing chasing him, because again, horror film. But we don't see it. And again, I think that works really well for the first hour-ish of the movie. We don't know what's chasing Clark. So Clark goes to his therapist. We'd seen Clark in therapy already. They did role playing. I rolled my eyes about it. I cannot think of a time I've ever done a role play other than when I was in schooling. It's a very sort of like, I don't know. And then you're not even like role playing with the client per se. You're sort of role playing as a client to then whatever. It's fine. I do family sculptures and stuff. Like I will do some what I would sort of consider hokey things that do work well. So I won't say role playing is like a bad therapy technique. I just think it shows up in a lot of movies and TV shows, and I don't imagine a ton of therapists do it. But maybe other therapists are out there role playing a lot with clients, and it's just not a tool I use very often. But Clark is there because he got kicked out of his house by his wife. He had problems drinking. So yeah, all this stuff sort of sets the backdrop for him to come in very agitated. He comes in late to therapy. He's like jittery. He's got this map. He's trying to explain this really fantastical thing about if you saw a dog for the first time and then try to draw it, you would get some things right, you get other things wrong. As describing the Backrooms to his therapist. His therapist has to make sure he's not drunk, which like very accurate. He did ask about getting chaptered. And again, like that's pretty accurate. A lot of times clients will come in nervous to tell their therapist something, even somebody they have a good relationship with. I have clients who are like, remind me again, what do you have to report? And that's really great. Again, I'm happy to have those conversations because I want to talk about those things. If you're suicidal, if you're struggling with something, if you're using substances, if you're thinking of harming yourself or somebody else, you should talk to your therapist about that. So welcome those conversations. I thought, again, a little nice like nod to real life therapy, because that stuff happens. And when he knows he's going to sound crazy. So he's like, when would you have to have me committed? And then proceeds to tell her about these things that she's super doubtful of. He pulls out the map, shows her the map of all the back rooms that he had gotten to. And again, I think I didn't feel like the movie was too short or too long. It seems adequate. They could have maybe had some other stuff in there, just some uncanniness or whatever. I wouldn't have not liked watching him explore the rooms in sort of an unsettled but not being chased sort of way. Because there was this then liminal space. See what I did there? I forced it. I apologize. I take that back. There was this space in the movie where we know he'd been spending a lot of time in the back rooms, but we didn't see any of that. And again, most of what we did see was sort of being chased or deeply uncomfortable, where I think it could have sat for, I'm not saying 15 extra minutes of movie. I'm saying 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there of him sort of mapping this out and exploring the back rooms while not being under pressure of being chased. I think if you go somewhere and you get chased once or twice in it, you're not going to keep going back to it. So that was the only thing where it's like, oh, that is a little surprising, but okay. And then he gets trapped, right? He has, sure, of course. So his therapist then like goes to the furniture store. It's not closed. It's not locked. It's creepy because the lights are sort of off because he turned off a ton of power at one point. And there's a mannequin. As I get older, I've never liked spiders. I'm an actual arachnophobe. Like, they're beautiful creatures and they do a lot for the environment, and I just cannot stand them. Send shivers down my spine. To watch them move, I can look at them stationary and not be bothered, but it's the crawling. I don't like scorpions either. Something about that movement really grosses me out, even as I get older. Crabs. Anyway, I've always been arachnophobe is my point. As I've gotten older, I've developed a pretty strong aversion to mannequins. I just find them very unsettling and don't like them. And I'm also way more claustrophobic as an old person than I was when I was younger. Some of that might be because I'm much larger. I don't know. But some things that I didn't really mind when I was younger, I've developed fears of, aversions to. But I find mannequins to be quite creepy. And so a number of mannequins and or like things that didn't make it all the way through this extra dimension. So there's a bunch of stuff there that's just sort of like creepy. There's like an overall MC Escher sort of feel to it, but also abandoned mall. So, anyway, Mary goes to Clark's store. There's a mannequin. You fully expect the mannequin to move or jump or do something. It doesn't. Again, I don't think the film's horror relied on jump scares. There were some, but not like, again, in the sense that you're being chased by some unknown horror, not like, gotcha. So I liked that. I don't dislike a jump scare, but I think sometimes they're cheap. And the Mary goes in, and Mary's got like trauma. We sort of see Mary growing up, like her house gets sort of torn down. She's got this like concrete slab from her like childhood home, but also her mom was institutionalized, and her mom like never let her leave the house or whatever. We don't really get Clark's full backstory or Mary's full backstory. And again, I think that fits in the Backrooms lore for the YouTube channel, but I don't think these characters were introduced. Comments, correct me if I'm wrong. I've watched like the first 2 YouTube videos of it. I haven't done a full deep dive. I might. Again, it's sort of the aesthetic is oddly nostalgic, even though it's horror. So there's a pleasing, I don't know. There's the nostalgia to it. But Mary ends up in the back rooms as well. She does find Clark. Clark has like his assistant and somebody with a video camera, which again, I guess does place it in the early 90s because that became a more accessible thing as the 90s went on. Whereas early 90s, that would have still been pretty rare where you need to find somebody to get a camera. But I'm just processing that in real time. The assistant and the camera guy get like attacked by the monster. We don't know what the monster is. Again, we haven't seen it up to this point. And I think the focal point of the film, actually, that was really well done is Mary finds sort of this hand-drawn thing on one of the walls where there's a dead end, and she sees movement out of the corner of her eyes, which again, like, happens a lot. That's the like discomfort of this, is like you're sort of in this empty warehouse, this old abandoned office building, but like something's there. And it ends up being Clark, and Clark comes out, and then she hears the monster, quote unquote monster, which again we haven't really seen yet. And Clark says, "Don't worry, that's just me." And then he sort of puts her in a chokehold, and she passes out. She wakes up tied to a chair. And I, as a mental health professional, was like, this was the meat of the movie, because Clark is unwell, having stayed in the back rooms for as long as he has. And Mary, as his therapist, is trying to balance like, oh shit, I'm in danger. I need to get out of here. This person's not safe. With, she's a trained therapist, and this is one of her clients, and she's trying to be helpful. And I thought this was pretty compelling. Clark's really compelling here as somebody who's lost it. Sort of like, again, the mannequin being creepy. There's some mannequins, but they're wrong. He's sort of explaining to Mary what he's figured out about the Backrooms is like their memories of themselves, and that's why they're wrong. So it's like a person with like 3 faces, vertical, another person with 3 faces are horizontal. There was also like, again, I wouldn't say millennial coded, but this probably makes more sense for Gen Alpha, but like the early AI stuff was like creepy and weird. Too many fingers, eyes, faces being wrong. Again, a lot of that stuff about AI image generation has gotten a lot better. Fuck AI. I'm not defending it. We shouldn't be using it to make art. We should be using it as a tool to simplify certain things, and we shouldn't be putting it on everything because it's terrible for the environment and we don't want it, and it's a bubble and blah, blah, blah. Not a fan of AI. I'm just saying, like, again, if you were maybe young on the internet when AI was getting hot, some of that uncanny image generation stuff was probably pretty horrific and would stand out a lot. So there's a bunch of that in the film. Again, sort of that nostalgia for even an early internet, like the screensaver and some of the other stuff, but also for like early AI adopters. Like, again, the image generation was creepy. John Oliver marrying a lettuce type stuff. It got bad, especially when you fed it to itself a couple of times. And it felt like that sort of like the Backrooms rendering people was wrong because it was just trying to like remember them. And at that next level, stuff got wrong. We sort of also got this scene of like, maybe it was supposed to be Mary's subconscious going like deeper and deeper and deeper. And each level we went down, it got less and less reality and more like wrong. So the people were definitely off-putting. Clark stabs one, and then you see there's sort of like fluff inside, and he's like, you can eat them. And again, as somebody who really doesn't like mannequins, I did not like this part. But Mary's definitely trying to battle, like, how do I help my client who's clearly not doing well mentally with, like, how do I get out? And Clark's like, let's do our role play, which again, that's why I don't role play with clients. I also don't role play with clients because you have to be really specific on like what it's for. It's not to practice to then go do. And I think a lot of therapists probably do it that way of like, I'll pretend to be your partner and like, blur. And like what happens when that doesn't work, right? Like what happens when that person doesn't respond the way a therapist would respond, which is like, of course they won't. And it's one of the things too that makes therapy, like dialogue in therapy, the way that I dialogue with my clients, the way that we converse together is different than what happens in real life. That's very intentional. The way I host my podcast is very intentional versus like TV shows where people like just talk and then like never interrupt each other, never like yell and scream and like talk over each other. Where like in real life, that happens all the time. It's a huge problem in dialogue. It's one of the things I hate about like the modern panel news shows where it's like, just people talking over each other. Nobody is modeling. Like that's all politics is. It's like, I don't have to listen. So we have really bad examples of conversing. And and dialoguing, and then also like the flip is also very unrealistic. So that's part of the reason I don't do role plays, because you have to say this is about going deep for you. What comes out, which again is what Mary does with Clark, again not throwing too much shade, other than at the tool itself. And so Clark wants to then do the role play again, and this time it's the roles are sort of reversed, where Mary's very uncomfortable and her true feelings sort of come out. And again, I don't think that's really how role playing works. I'm nitpicking. It did seem like sort of the aesthetic, the idea of the film was mostly creepy horror aesthetics, and then they threw the therapy plotline in to like make it about something. But that's not what we needed our horror from. It's just sort of like, anyway, she ends up shouting at him, which I thought was really interesting, because I was trying to think like, I mean, if a client abducted me, I wouldn't, I don't know. That's a hypothetical that who knows what would happen. It's not happened to me. I would like to think I would handle it a certain way, which would be to still sort of maintain that therapy role, oddly. And I think there's a default, especially for professionals, where like that is comfortable for us. Like we've been trained in it. We have thousands upon thousands of hours doing it. In a moment of high stress, it makes sense that our brain would default to that setting. But at some point, Mary sort of like is overwhelmed by the stress, and she shouts at Clark that it's like his fault, and she calls him a moron or an idiot or something, because it's all in his head. And then the monster comes out, and it is Clark. It's him in the terrible sort of poorly rendered version of himself that showed up in this commercial that he shot earlier in the movie for his furniture store, where he's like a pirate, Captain Clark's furniture outlet. And again, like there's that weird sort of nostalgia. Toy Story has this, right? Toy Story came out like 1995 or whatever. It's like Weird Al's Toy Barn. Maybe that's Toy Story 2. But the guy dresses up as a chicken suit for like his commercial. And there was a time where like that was common, especially for like car dealerships and other local businesses. Like that's what they did. It was odd. It was odd then, and it's very odd being like, why was that a thing now? But so you get this monster that's like horrifically rendered, and Clark has like made peace with the monster, right? Earlier he says it's just me, and then we see it is just Clark. One of the mannequin runs away very unexpectedly. Again, fuck those mannequins. Don't like that. And after like Clark had scalped her and also like been like putting food fluff from the other mannequin on the plates, is weird. There's a mannequin that also turns light on and off. That was one of the few like startled jump scares. It wasn't a jump scare specifically, like a cut to it. It was sort of a startled thing. And then the bad render of Clark's monster then eats Clark. And again, like then we're off to the races of like straight horror, right? So Mary's got to try and get away from this thing. She ends up battering its little wooden pirate leg, but it keeps coming after her and she can't get out. And there's a really nice moment where she escapes the back room and goes to leave the front of the store and realizes she didn't escape the back room. She's still in the back room. And I liked that. That was fun. I always enjoy when I don't know where a movie is going. And I like when movies subvert things. I'm not a fun person to watch movies with because I typically am like, here's what's going to happen. And I don't say it out loud because nobody likes that. But my brain is happy to be like, I recognize this. Here's what's going to happen. And then my brain is rewarded for being right, even if it sort of ruins my movie watching experience. So nice little bit of subversion. There was enough there where I was like, I don't think she got out. But then it sort of sells you, and then it does sort of say like, nope, she didn't get out. So that's really interesting. She gets away from the monster, and then we sort of meet Phil and the people from the MRI company that stumbled into an extra dimensional pocket. And that's where it sort of is like, oh, there's a much deeper lore here. And where the movie sort of cuts, it's sort of like, well, does Mary escape or not? And then we see a very poorly rendered, a misremembered, overly misremembered Mary, and the film ends. And I'm somebody who stays through the credits always. I don't know, it's a thing I do. Not like for Marvel end credits, I've just always stayed. I like the music. I think it's like, I don't know. I think it's like nice for the people who work really hard on movies to sit through the scroll. So I've always been somebody who stays through the credits. There was no end credit scene, but one of the names from the YouTube series is special thanks. So like, again, I think there were some nods to the lore, which I think is great. I think a movie that doesn't go too far into fan service, but does have the Easter eggs for the people who want it, is a good balance to be struck for stuff like that. And again, I don't know what happens next. I don't know if this is like, I think it will be successful enough where they're going to do another movie. And again, I just hope they don't run it into the ground. But I do think it'll drive a lot of people to the YouTube series to check it out. And that has to be like a huge win. I think that's a huge win for like art and, creativity that isn't owned by AI and isn't a huge IP. It will turn into one, right? Intellectual property is the way that huge corporations make money and protect their money. And like we just talk about IPs normally now is like regular people, and like that's bizarre. And it's part of like colonization is really not great. I don't support it. But again, I think for somebody to do something sort of low key, low tech on YouTube and then like have it be a thing, I do think is a win overall for art and creativity. And I think for people to get interested in it and go back and have some of that lore is really interesting, where it feels more like fan driven. Again, like this movie is directed by a YouTuber, but he didn't come up with the idea. He started the YouTube series, but again, it was something that was sort of like community made in the sort of on this like 4chan post, but then other people sort of ran with it and made it a thing. And yeah, he had the chops creatively to make a YouTube series and film it and direct all of that stuff and then turn that into a movie. So like, again, I'm not saying like he stole other people's ideas. He took this thing that was sort of made collectively and made it for the collective. Again, I think that's good for the art overall. I am skeptical that won't just turn into a new IP, which would be a bummer. But maybe that's nostalgia too, right? Maybe that's my nostalgia for the early internet before it got bought up by tech fascists and billionaire bastards and is algorithm driven. Because the early internet was like an interesting community based thing where like you could find random pockets of it with your people. And that was nice. As somebody who grew up like deeply religious, like the early internet was very freeing for a lot of people to find community that you wouldn't have access to elsewhere and knowledge that you wouldn't have elsewhere. And again, I think that creative outlet on the internet can be really great as long as it's not like ruined by AI, which again, why does AI not have to respect intellectual property, but we all do? It's a giant 200-story robot rummaging through everybody's personal libraries and stealing stuff and being treated differently. None of it makes sense because it's all made up. But Backrooms was good. It was a good horror, uncanny valley. It was a good unsettling film. It's one of the, I think it will suffer sort of the same criticism over time that any movie does this. Like Signs was really great until you saw the aliens, right? Like, well, and also Signs also they're great because like the aliens' one weakness is the thing that covers 70% of the planet. You would think they would have done a little bit more research on that. War of the Worlds is at least like the common cold. Sure, why would they have any immunity to that? Aliens that can't stand water shouldn't land on a water planet. Earth is 70% water, although we're doing our best to dry it out. Good job, AI. AI corporations. Anyway, I think some of horror films where like you don't see something plays really well on our fear of the dark. And it's not the fear of the dark, but it's the fear of the unknown, the darkness. We can't see what it is, so we don't know what it is, and we're scared of it, therefore. I thought that did really well, but it's very uncanny valley. That's sort of the liminal space horror aesthetic overall. And I think there could be fun places that would go with it. I just don't want there to be 10 movies that get worse and worse. If they have 2 or 3 more ideas of this that keep it sort of fresh and update it and are interesting, cool. I also think like, ooh, giant tech corporation ruining the world, blah blah blah. And it did have like what's the Assassin's Creed? Async is the Backrooms company, but like Abstergo is the Assassin's Creed one. A little bit of that, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know why it gave me that vibe, but yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting if it gets fleshed out, if they move it back online, if they want to do another movie. Again, I think there might be an interesting story to keep being told. We don't need every film franchise to be 30 films like the MCU. That should actively never, ever be the goal. But again, the way that corporations are making money is intellectual property. So it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. I'm not going to go off on my IP tangent again. But the film was really fun. Again, it's quick. It's breezy. It's an hour and 45 minutes. It goes by fast. I didn't think the monster's less scary when you see it. Certainly. Psychologically, that is what happens. And I didn't mind it. You know, it didn't need to be a frightening looking monster to still be very unsettling. And I think they really nailed that. And it'll be interesting. I think the psychological concepts as sort of a subconscious could be really fleshed out and be really interesting as well as like a psych nerd. That is the one thing where people are gonna be like, 20-year-old made this movie. That's so cool. What a brilliant genius. And like one of the things that I do think shows through is like somebody who doesn't have a ton of life experience is like, yeah, that metaphor of the subconscious is very basic. Like the therapy and psych concepts in this film were very basic as somebody who like doesn't know a lot of psychology or just doesn't have the life experience to back it up. So could be interesting to explore. Would almost be interesting if like this creator came back to it like after a decade. I think would be a cooler thing. And what does a 30-year-old do with sort of nostalgia, liminal space horror versus pumping a new one out next year or the year after? So, but A24, you know, I don't want to say in A24 we trust, but as a production company, that's probably the one that I will be like, ooh, this looks interesting most often, and then actually follow up and watch. So yeah, Backrooms is fun. Go see it. If you haven't, I don't know why you stuck around and watched a spoiler-filled review of it. But go watch it. It's fun for like just sort of the adrenaline rush that horror movies can provide. I'm going to start working my way through the YouTube series. Like I said, I'm like the first 2 chapters in. And that will be slow going. I'm not promising a follow-up on that. I'm old and have young kids and don't have all that free time to just sort of do a deep dive, but interesting enough concept and a bit of fun with the YouTube series. So more to that, which is cool. I like that. I like being able to like find an author I like and go read all their old books that I didn't know. Had never been on my radar. So being able to like binge something like that on the back end is cool. So yeah, I liked it. Go see it. If you did see it, thanks for watching my review of it. If you are like, yes, this part of the YouTube series is great, definitely watch that. Drop down in the comments. Let me know so I stick around for that stuff. If there's something else that you would like me to watch, review, drop it in the comments and let me know that as well. All right, internet, y'all take care of yourselves. Try not to fall through any walls. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace.